Let's begin.
Hey there, scary story fanatics. Welcome back to Cleaving Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. The villains are back out on the street, and you know what that means. It's time to take to the phone booth and jump into action with tonight's follow-up story, one that Doughboy420 likes to call Not All Heroes Wear Capes, Book 2, Chapter 3, The Sleepy Time Killer.
Eidolon had become pretty withdrawn for a time after she accidentally killed that man. I was guilty of that too, but over time, with an ability like mine, I kind of got used to all of it. I wrestle with that a lot. I kept reaching out. She would let me know that she was okay, and then that would be that. Day in, day out. I felt bad for her, and I hoped that she would come around and be alright. But all I could really do was let her know that my daughter and I were thinking about her and hope that that helped cheer her up. In the meantime, I attempted to track down the gold digger after his escape, where he guilted his own arm off like a wild animal caught in a trap, chewing its own leg off to get away. In my search, I decided that my best bet for information would be to contact Officer Kraft. It would be good to have a contact on the inside to feed me information. It would be a major help, because otherwise, I'm just walking around hoping that trouble finds me, which I usually don't have much trouble with, but still, I was having no luck finding the gold digger, and I needed his help. I watched the officer and followed him, and when he was interviewing someone in another case, I pulled up my mask to cover my face, and then I made sure that he saw me before I ducked into an alley. I hoped that he wouldn't have me surrounded as I waited there with very few options for an escape. I was taking quite a risk.
Are you the God's Hand?
Officer Kraft asked after turning into the alley.
Yes,
I said, doing my best to disguise my voice. I also hid in the shadows to further obscure my identity.
Why do you kill people?
He asked the question that I dreaded.
I don't enjoy it. I'm not a mindless murderer. There are just dark things in this city that most don't realize. I'm not the best person, but I've decided to use this curse that I have to end the worst crimes of the city. I explained, still trying to hide my true voice.
I don't agree with your methods, but you're right. There are darker things lurking in the city, things I can't explain, things that the police are powerless to stop if they decide to go against us. But you stand a chance, and I think that you may be our only hope.
Officer Kraft informed me.
Leave the regular criminals to the law, but the criminals beyond the law are your jurisdiction. Deal?
He added. Deal, I said, after giving it a short moment to think it over.
Okay, good, because I have a case for you.
Kraft offered. You do? I asked, surprised by his forward request.
Yeah, there have been some really weird deaths recently. There isn't any real connection between them that we can see, but they all died the same way.
How? I asked.
They all starved to death. Food easily within reach. But it was like they just gave up and let it happen.
That is weird.
The only thing we have to go on is that they all died in the west end of the city. I gotta get back over there before anyone else notices I'm gone. It was nice to finally meet you, and remember our deal,"
the officer added before turning to go back to work. "If you find a guy with one arm, blonde, turns people to gold, let me know," I said.
"Gold?"
Kraft questioned.
"I'll be sure to keep an eye out,"
he continued before finally returning to his job. I didn't get the information that I wanted, but I did discover a whole new threat. People were just giving up and dying wherever they lay, and it wasn't long before I would encounter this myself. Kraft contacted me with a case. He had been called to assist with an eviction from an apartment, and when they got inside, they found a pretty disturbing scene, and he decided to call me before calling the CSIs. I had been in the general area, so I was able to get there fairly quickly. The landlord had thrown up on the floor before going back to his own apartment downstairs, but that wasn't the least of the disgust that I found upon my arrival. The place stunk to high heaven. Rotting food lay everywhere, and insects swarmed around, flying and scurrying about every surface. On the couch, we found a small man, skin stretched tightly to bone, dehydrated. You could see his ribs, and his arms were tightly wrapped around his body, thin as soda cans all the way up. His skin was stretched so tightly to his frame that the veins and arteries popped and his skin split, allowing his blood to flow freely, blood that had long since dried out. His eyes were sunken in and completely glazed over, and he lay in a mess of his own excrement. Maggots and flies scurried about his corpse, making it their newest nest and food source. A bowl of curdled and stinking cereal lay beside him on the end table, almost completely untouched. Next to it, a bag of chips, entirely full.
"The landlord gave a description of someone that came here looking for him,"
Kraft said, pointing to the dead man on the couch.
"He said, in his words, a big fat guy with clothes that couldn't fit. Asked about him about a week or so prior. He didn't recognize the guy, so he made a note of it,"
Officer Kraft informed me. "So, what? He's gorging himself on people's will to live?" I asked, trying to figure out what exactly we were dealing with.
"It looks like it,"
Kraft agreed.
"Now that we know what we're dealing with, I have to call this in. You should get out of here,"
he added, and as he reached for his radio, I gave him a friendly wave and left the scene of the crime. Over the next few days, I looked for someone that fit the description. You would think that a 400-pound dude would stand out in a crowd, but I didn't find him. He found me. I guess he heard through the grapevine that I was looking for him, and he used some bait and set a trap for me. The guy went to the mall and sucked some of the life out of a handful of people, sending the others around them screaming in fear as these unlucky few suddenly lost dozens of pounds, leaving them as frail pieces of their former selves. When I arrived there, I found a guy at the food court laying helplessly on the floor, just staring at the sample food tray that he had dropped, wanting so badly to eat the food in front of him, but having no energy or drive to do so. He just laid there, letting himself waste away on the floor. There was a family of 4, parents and their 2 young children, all dehydrated, suffering from rapid weight loss, and laying with their heads down on the table, just staring at each other, drool trickling out of their mouths and pooling onto the tables beneath their heads. Several other people lay in various stages of frailty, and a thin man simply sat there at the edge of the food court, reading a newspaper.
My, the things going on in the world today.
The guy shook his head before setting the paper down on the table at his side. Are you all right? Have you seen a big guy around here anywhere? I asked the man.
A big guy?
The thin man stated.
You mean like this?
He asked before opening his mouth wide, unhinging his jaw like a snake and tilting his head back. Then I watched as the people around me became even more close to death, their skin pulled back against their bones until it split and began to force blood out over the people's ever-shrinking blood vessels. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Stop it!" I commanded. I just watched as the guy grew so fat that his clothing stretched around his bulbous stomach, barely fitting around his thickening arms and legs. His fingers grew 3 times their normal size, and his feet grew so much that they caused his shoes to split. When he was done gorging himself, he had grown several times the size of an average person, and everyone around the area was left dying or dead, having so much of the life sucked out of them so quickly that their eyes sank back into their skulls. It was a horrific thing to see, even for a guy with an ability like mine. Then I felt it, starting at my fingertips. They grew cold, almost numb, as the surfaces of my skin calloused over. Then I felt my hands weakening as my joints began to ache. This was followed by what I can only describe as a weakening of my spirit. I felt empty, like I had no reason to keep fighting, like nothing mattered. I had feelings of weakness and abandonment, attempting to force myself to literally stay strong in the face of all that stood before me and within me.
I can't believe greed and envy couldn't do you in. You're weak. Your spirit is sour.
The large man hissed at me. My spirit was sour because he was feeding upon a tainted life source. I was every bit as much of a cursed soul as he was. Of course I left a bad taste in his mouth. I watched as he once again threw his head backward and unhinged his jaw to begin sucking my life force out of me. I attempted to walk toward him, but I felt my legs begin to weaken as my pants became looser, my legs eventually becoming so weak that they gave way and fell out from underneath me. But I still continued to crawl toward him, hoping that I'd be able to touch him and drain his life away from him instead. I was just feet from him, feet away from delivering my death touch. But my legs could no longer support my weight, and I toppled to the floor, the fingers of my ever-shrinking blackened hand just mere inches away from the man's foot. But I was helpless. I could not move. I felt hopeless. I looked up at the man, now looking easily like he weighed nearly 1,000 pounds, his body almost doubling in size from the 2 beings that were held within my body, both me and the demon that gave me my ability. This is what I assume caused the giant man to stop for a moment and turn away from me, where he emptied some of his contents of his stomach onto the ground. It was black and thick, like oil and tar. It gurgled up out of his throat and spilled out in a sopping, disgusting mess upon the ground. He heaved several times before finally catching his breath and wiping his face on his arm, which had now split through his shirt.
Your soul tastes like shit,
he said as he turned back to me, holding his stomach.
But my mama always said that you gotta finish the parts of your meal that you don't like before you can have the stuff that you do like, and I would very much like for you to die.
The extremely large man looked down at me before unhinging his jaw once more, My whole body ached, and I was sure that it was all over for me. Then, I felt a warm substance splash across my face, and I looked up to find the Sleepy Time Killer's stomach split open from one side to the other, his blood and internal organs spilling out onto the floor, and also onto me in the process.
What?
He screamed out in pain and confusion, his hands now attempting to hold his guts inside his body. But this was stopped by his hands being severed from his body by a blade created of pure darkness. It was then that I noticed that some of the overhead lights had been turned off, allowing for some good shadows for Eidolon to work with. Then I saw her. She appeared with her usual blinking through the darkness, giving her an opening to create a sword of dark energy that she then drove through the legs of the colossal-sized man, pinning them awkwardly together. It was shortly thereafter that I noticed that something was different about her. She wasn't her usual self. She was more like the tempestuous being that killed the genie, and now this darkness had returned once more to put an end to Nap Time, the name that I had given him in my mind while I lay there, motionless and unable to continue with even the smallest of movements. I watched as Eidolon ripped through the man and commanded her shadows to pull the innards from his body, leaving him no chance of survival. Finally, the fat man fell dead upon the ground, his intestines splayed out for as far as the shadows could reach. Eidolon just stood there, staring at him with a blank expression on her face, her eyes glowing with that same purple color from that night where she accidentally killed that man. It was as if something completely new had awoken inside of her. I watched as the light faded and her eyes returned to their normal shade before I finally fell unconscious, completely unable to go any longer. When I awoke, it was 3 days later, and thanks to my demon-induced rapid healing, I had also regained a significant portion of my muscle mass, but I was still in no shape to do a damn thing, and I knew that with time, things would get better and I would make a full recovery, but I don't know if I could say the same for Eidolon. Something was very different about her when she used her abilities, almost as if she let the demon take over to do the dirty work for her. After what happened with her, I guess that would be a tempting solution to future problems. But you can't put your problems on someone else forever, and they shouldn't burden themselves with your problems, nor is it good to let someone else take the wheel of your life, no matter how tempting it may be, especially when that someone is a nameless and all-powerful being that controls any and every shadow and can kill without hesitation. It was about a week before I was able to walk again, and 2 weeks before I had the muscle capacity to return to work. Luckily, they believed my story, and having to have a tapeworm removed is the only thing I could come up with to explain my absence and sickly look. During my recovery, I couldn't get a thought out of my head. He called them greed and envy. So if the gold digger was greed, and the genie was envy, that must make nap time sloth. So by that logic, there were probably 4 more very dangerous, demon-possessed people around the city, just waiting to wreak havoc. Not to mention that Goldilocks was still on the loose. 2 down, 5 to go. I had no idea what was waiting for me.
Well, it seems that the true terrorizers live in one's mind, and the best of the worst are great at exploiting it. Hence, it's better to be evil to begin with. But if you're pumped for more super tales of gore, make sure to fly by again next weekend. And until then, make sure to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can catch you all again next Saturday.
Social media can be very unpredictable, especially regarding horror content. If this content gets removed, all new content will be simultaneously presented on various websites provided in the description to this video. Make sure to follow me in other digital spaces so that you never miss out on the terror. Also, if you like this video, make sure to leave a comment and hit the like button. It helps the channel a lot. If you're new to the channel and you enjoy what's here, consider hitting that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you never miss an upload. Writing is a dream of mine, and it's all of you that make that dream come true.